And cleanup efforts continue in Kentucky and several other states that were devastated by a barrage of tornadoes over the weekend. President Biden surveyed the damage yesterday in two of the hardest hit communities in Kentucky. He met with emergency personnel and promised federal aid to build back better, if you will. So Lilia Luciano is in Dawson Springs, Kentucky with the latest on that. Lilia, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anne Marie. Federal FEMA workers are on the ground helping people sign up for aid, but the damage is so devastating. Here where we are in Dawson Springs, 3 out of every 4 homes was destroyed. And in a town where people make, the median income is about $25,000 a year, one of the biggest fears is that this area, the community, the neighborhood, will inevitably break apart. At 87 years old, Andy Hernandez and his 78-year-old wife, Betty, are starting over.
We lost just about everything.
Some donations from their church and the few things they call their own are packed up in a truck.
We love that little house, and but anyway, it's totaled. It's totaled.
It's total.
Yeah, it's totaled.
The house can't be saved.
No.
Now they have to leave their home. The couple couldn't afford renter's insurance, and they can't afford to stay in Dawson Springs.
We live on a limited income, and we had to cut back because we were paying $1,200 a month with Medicare and supplements, and it went up so high.
In a town of about 2,400 people, nearly a third live below the poverty line. During his visit to Dawson Springs Wednesday, President Biden promised the government would help get people back on their feet.
I promise you, the governor's not walking away, your county judge is not walking away, your congressman's not walking away, no one's walking away. We're in this for the long haul.
And across the state, dozens of families are grieving the deaths of their loved ones, like the family of 50-year-old Matt Ferguson, who tried to write it out at home.
That part where you see the concrete bricks over there, that was where his trailer was.
According to his sister, Kathy.
He has never left his house, no matter how bad the storm got. It'll be all right. That's how he was. It'll be all right. I miss him already. And I'd wish that I had called him and told him to get over here. But knowing him, he would never have come.
President Biden has promised that the federal government will cover 100% of the emergency work and recovery efforts for 30 days. But we've been talking to people, and besides the assistance that will be available from the federal government and from the state and from the local churches and the community, one of the greatest concerns that people have is the displacement of their communities. These are neighborhoods and towns where everybody knows each other, where they've grown up each other, where they've gone to school together. And of course, after that, as we heard from stories of loss and of devastation, the long-term impact of trauma. People have not even, moved past the initial shock. We've talked to some people at the shelters, some of the responders who say we've heard that it takes about 2 weeks before people begin to cope with what's next. And those fears will start settling in if they haven't already. Anne Marie.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, in 2 weeks, maybe they'll have a good assessment of all that they've lost and what's going to take to rebuild. And we heard the president say, listen, we're in it for the long haul. 30 days, that's not exactly the long haul. I know there's going to be a lot of other programs and help in place, but what happens, what happens when things can't be rebuilt in 30 days? Who will cover the cost after that?
Well, I mean, the difference of this emergency declaration, so he first did an major disaster declaration, right? What that meant was 75% of the cost of emergency response. That includes, cleaning up the roads, debris, search and rescue, search and recovery efforts, some of the things that are the initial issues that need to be addressed for the rebuilding to begin. But he did alter that and added the cover to be 100%. Now, after those 30 days, it doesn't mean that people can't apply. People can still apply for direct assistance from FEMA up until, what I've read, is up until February of 2022. They can still even start the application process. It doesn't mean that the federal government will stop aiding. It just means that for this kind of debris removal, running the roads, the power, like all the things that are the immediate response, they're basically extending it to 30 days. I mean, it seems like an additional amount of resources given the extent of the damages that are here on the ground. But of course, after that, the state and FEMA will continue involved in all of those efforts and in assisting families, as well as HUD and all of the other agencies that tend to respond after the damage.
So that was actually going to be sort of my next question in terms of the types of resources that are now available to those in Kentucky. What resources have been deployed? I think we heard from, the governor earlier this week, and he had talked about, getting some shelters in place at area parks, the state parks, and so on and so forth. And sort of part B of that question is, do we have a sense of just the cost of the damage?
There is no way of assessing that at this point. We were talking to some FEMA representatives yesterday. Just, do you have an idea? What we know is that from the beginning of the year until now, the cost of natural disasters is way up there in the $100 billion range. And of course, that doesn't include this disaster. So just imagine the extent of it, which is, why President Biden has been addressing as well the importance of addressing climate change, because, regardless of the ties of climate change to tornadoes, there are a wide range of other natural disasters that are costing people lives, livelihoods, homes. Here on the ground, the National Guard has been present. The Army Corps of Engineers is involved in the cleanup efforts. There are so many different agencies, and of course the states. And what's interesting here is, it's a place where there's a lot of churches and there's a lot of faith. It's a very faith-based community. So the churches have stood in and provided a lot of the immediate assistance that people need. And as you mentioned, national parks as well. We talked to a representative from Park yesterday from Kentucky, who at one of the shelters that is within, it's a resort within a national park that has become a shelter. They're providing, of course, rooms, food, all the other basic necessities, taking in donations, and they expect that at some point then FEMA will reimburse them for their costs, because as we know, parks don't really have too great a budget to manage.
Yeah, that's so true. So, when we hear about tornadoes, we hear over and over again how random the destruction can be. So we know that there are people with houses that have been perfectly untouched. Problem is electricity and water, so they may not be able to stay there anyways. Do we know how long it's going to take to get more people online with electricity and water so they can stay in their homes?
They haven't given a date or an estimate of how long. The last numbers I read and heard from officials was around 18,000 people across the state are still without power. And one of the things that I can tell you is concerning, even to us coming out here this morning, we're in the middle of this debris. Yeah, there are some houses standing, but with the amount of debris, the amount of rubble, of particles, of everything that's around here from the destruction, there's high winds. I mean, I checked the weather app this morning and it was something between, 12-mile-an-hour winds to 29, mile-an-hour winds here where we're standing. So it's not just no power, it's cold, no water, but also being in an area that could be toxic for people to live in. So a lot of those people, even if you look at the houses and it looks like it's standing, it's not safe. They can't stay there. So it's a long-term recovery. They're also in shelters or with family members and dealing with the effects almost as much for the time being as the people who've had complete destruction.
So Kentucky was not the only state hit. What sort of help are states like Arkansas, Illinois, Tennessee, Missouri, what are they getting?
Well, that's one of the big questions. When something happens like this, even within the state of Kentucky, a lot of the attention had gone to Mayfield. And when we went, we've been spending the week in smaller towns, and people say, are we going to get that kind of assistance? And I think on the wider national scope, that's the same thing that other states are doing. And the president did talk about, and governors are reaching out about the needs in these other states and what kind of disaster declaration will come and what that means. I mean, that just means unleashing more aid, more resources, sometimes direct assistance to people. I understand that there are, disaster declarations everywhere. The Kentucky one is the major one, the one that has the 100% of the cost for 30 days that has been declared.
All right, Lilia, thank you very much.
To see that. Thank you.